Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Everyman, or the summoning of Everyman, as it's sometimes called. I'm reading this out of the Norton Anthology of Drama. So this is a medieval morality play. It is a late medieval morality play, sort of on the verge of going into the Renaissance. Around 1510, I think this play is sort of the first evidence of it we have. Morality plays are a really fascinating medieval genre. So part of what they were meant to do as a group was to convey the lessons of Catholic Christianity to a largely illiterate peasant audience, right? So these were people who could not read the Bible. And in fact, the medieval Catholic Church didn't necessarily want people reading the Bible, but they did want people to have specific lessons, specific doctrinal lessons, particular conceptions of morality, particularly things that had to do with obedience to authority. Church authority especially, but also secular authority, kings, nobles, lords, whatever it is. So, like many morality plays, this is an allegory. We have characters who basically directly embody particular virtues or characteristics. So, I mean, so if we look down the character list here, we've got the messenger, that's fine, whatever. We've got God, we've got death, Everyman, the titular character, and of course, there is this interesting juxtaposition, especially in the early portion of the play, which I'll talk more in more detail about in just a second, where there's this sort of slippage between Everyman, the character's name, and every man, all of humanity. Because again, this is a sort of universalist message of the Catholic Church at this point. But then we've got fellowship, we've got kindred, we've got cousin, we've got goods, good deeds, knowledge, confession, beauty, strength, discretion, and 5 wits, each of whom represents exactly the thing that they say they represent. Good deeds is the good deeds of Everyman. The things that he has done. And that was very, very important in medieval Catholicism. This was very much this was pre-Protestant Reformation, really, because one of the things in the Protestant Reformation, especially for low church denominations, is that faith in itself becomes sufficient for redemption. For the medieval Catholic Church, no, that would not have made any sense whatsoever. You had to have faith. More importantly, debatably at least, you had to go through the sacraments, whichever sacraments were relevant for you and your life, and you had to do good deeds or charitable works. Those were really the things. It was about external validation of faith more necessarily than it was in your heart of hearts, do you believe? And so good deeds is super, super important here. But then we've also got figures like fellowship, who represents fellowship, having friends out in the world. Again, it's an allegory. It's not working at a high conceptual level here. What it's meant to do is convey specific messages. And the specific message ultimately that Everyman conveys, that the play conveys, is you could die at any time. You need to make sure that your soul is ready. It's sort of, right, Indiana Jones moment, Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword guy, my soul is prepared, how is yours? This is what we've got going on here. So basically Everyman is, so we start with a messenger. And I'll start from the beginning and sort of go through this because it's really a fascinating play. So we start with the messenger. And basically what the messenger does is gives us the topic of the play and then a sort of call to action for what we as viewers are supposed to be paying attention to. So the messenger enters and says, "I pray you all give your audience and hear this matter with reverence. dance, by figure a moral play, the summoning of Everyman called it is, that of our lives an ending shows how transitory we be all day. The matter is wonder precious, but the intent of it is more gracious and sweet to bear away. The story saith, man in the beginning look well and take good heed to the ending, be you never so gay. You think sin in the beginning full sweet, which in the end causeth the soul to weep when the body lieth in clay. Here shall you see how fellowship and jollity, both strength, pleasure, and beauty, will fade from thee as flower in May. For ye shall hear how our heaven king calleth every man to a general reckoning. Give audience and hear what he doth say. So basically, the messenger tells you the purpose of this play is to show you that the stuff that you put your faith in the world is transitory. It does not matter. God is what matters. Doing the right stuff is what matters. The things that transcend this world are the things that matter. Watch the play, learn this lesson. Again, this is not meant to be subtle. It's not meant to be sort of difficult to parse what's going on. This is a sermon on stage, essentially. So then we have God come on. And God has this long bit, about 40 lines almost. And basically he's like, people are fucking being sinful again. They have turned away from me. They're ignoring my commandments. They're hoarding wealth. They're doing all sorts of wanton behaviors on earth and enjoying life and not giving their gold away to charity and all this shit. And I fucking told them. So I'm going to kill every man. And again, this is where we get that sort of slippage, because God actually uses the phrase every man at least 4 times in this speech, but it's every space man. And so from a linguistic perspective, as you're hearing it in the audience, there isn't a difference between every man, one word, name of the character, and every space man, every human being. Linguistically, there's no difference as you hear it, but as you read it, in this version at least, there is a difference. God is clearly talking about humanity as such, including the audience. You watching this play, you're all fucking sinful and ignoring God and not doing enough charity and whatever all stuff. And you need to change your ways before it's too late, because God can send death for you at any moment, which in fact he does. God calls on death to come and get every man and have every man make his reckoning. And that's a big thematic concept in this play. That every man has to justify his deeds in life and show that he was basically virtuous. And we've got these elements of so death shows up and he goes to every man and he's basically like, every man, time to come, going to death now. And we've got these elements of what was called the Danse Macabre, which was this theme that really exploded with the Black Death, as you might imagine, in the 14th century, but then carries over through to the early Renaissance period. Northern Renaissance, in this case. The Danse Macabre, basically the idea is death comes for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a king, if you're the Pope, if you're a priest, a noble, or you're a fucking peasant doing peasant shit in the fields and stuff. Death comes for everybody. Death ain't care. Death is the equal opportunity employer par excellence. And so we've got these elements where like every man is like, oh, death, just give me like 12 more years and I'll give you a ton of gold. And death's like, yeah, no, ain't gonna happen, son. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill everybody. Nobody can stop me. Nobody can reason with me. Nobody can talk me out of it. Death's a coming. And so basically, Death is ultimately like, okay, Everyman, you can find some people or things or whatnots to help you on your journey, to comfort you on your journey. And so most of the rest of the play is basically Everyman looking for allies on this journey. And we get this series of initial things that Everyman turns to, worldly things. Fellowship is the first one, and then kindred and his cousin is the second, and then goods is the third. And basically, fellowship and kindred and cousin especially are like, yeah, Everyman, you're my best friend, dude. I'd do anything for you. I would die for you. That's how much I love you. Oh, you want me to go with you to death? Well, yeah, sorry, champ. I can't. I'm not going to. It is this weird thing where like, Fellowship especially is kind of weird about it, where he's basically like, so Everyman says, you promised otherwise, party. And then Fellowship says, I wot well I said so, truly. So Fellowship had promised to support Everyman in anything. He's now changed his mind once he's found out that it's Death. And then he's like, and yet if thou wilt eat or drink and make good cheer or haunt women the lusty company, I will not forsake you while the day is clear. Trust me verily. And then a little bit later, he's like, and thou will murder or any man kill, in that I will help thee with a good will. So Fellowship is basically like, yeah, man, if you want to go and like have a party and have sex with some women and murder some people, I'm there for you, bro. I'm not going to die for you. So this is what we get. The worldly things that Everyman puts his faith in turn away from him. And goods, his gold, his merchandise, his stuff, is even like, hey man, I helped corrupt you. I am the corrupter. Worldly goods, people put their faith in worldly goods and I lead them to hell. It's what I do. So Everyman is all abandoned, he's all sad and whatnot, and then he turns to good deeds. He's like, oh, my good deeds, maybe you will help. And good deeds is like, bro, I totally want to, but I am so weighed down by your sin and your general lack of doing good deeds that I can't even get up from the floor. I'm just fucking lying here. I'm just crushed under the weight of your sin. And so good deeds summons knowledge. They're starting to put together the A-team here, basically. They're starting to put together the team that's going to get Everyman into heaven. And knowledge is the first recruit here. So knowledge is basically like, what you need to do is go to confession. Confess your sins, throw yourself on the mercy of the Lord, accept the Eucharist and last rites and stuff like this, and that's step one. And so Everyman does this. He goes to confession. We have this bit where he confesses. He scourges himself in penitence, a very medieval thing. He basically like beats himself to show that he repents and to mortify the flesh, which was a concept where basically like the flesh desires food, drink, sex, all this stuff. So you mortify the flesh, you punish the flesh for being sinfully desirous. And then Everyman is joined by strength, discretion, beauty, and his 5 wits, each of which sort of represent his own abilities. And then they are like, good deeds pops back up. Good deeds is like, hey, I'm awake now. Confessing and flagellating yourself has really brought me back to life. You've revivified me through your suffering and confession of sins. So this is the A team, right? We have confession, who serves a brief role, but it's really good deeds, knowledge, strength, beauty, discretion, and the 5 wits, or the 5 senses. So they go to the grave, and then a strange thing happens, right? Because these are the things that good deeds and knowledge have been like. These are the virtues, the characteristics that will carry you on your journey. But when they get to the grave, Everyman is once again deserted, first by beauty, then by strength, then by discretion, then by the 5 wits. Because these are, and the lesson here becomes, and this is a parallel to, don't put your faith in goods, in fellowship, in the things of this world, but it's also, don't put your faith in yourself, the physical body, your physical strength, your physical beauty, your physical senses, whatever it is, because they will also fail you. And so again, we have this sort of repeat of the abandonment of Everyman. And he even says, "Oh, all things faileth save God alone." But that's not quite right, because Everyman says a little bit later, "O Jesu, help, all hath forsaken me." And good deeds says, "Nay, Everyman, I will bide with thee. I will not forsake thee indeed. Thou shalt find me a good friend at need." And then knowledge chimes in and is basically like, yeah, so I won't go into the grave with you, but I'll like walk right up there with you. I will be with you until the moment of death, and good deeds will go with you beyond death. So that's the sort of thing. And Everyman is like, okay, awesome. That's great. I feel so much better about this now. And then, accompanied to the grave by knowledge and good deeds, and then into the grave itself by good deeds, Everyman goes contented. We then have an angel who comes out and is basically like, yep, we've accepted Everyman's soul. He's good because he did the sacraments he needed to do. He confessed his sins. He did good deeds. He turned away from worldly stuff, etc., etc. And then you have a doctor of theology who comes out at the end and basically repeats the lesson that the messenger said to learn at the beginning. He's like, pay attention now to what you're doing, because God can send death for you at any time, and you better be judged righteously. So it's an interesting play as a morality play. It's also an interesting play because it's very late in the morality play allegory tradition. And so there is this odd kind of defensiveness about Catholicism at points, right? It emphasizes the sacraments, which is crucial for Catholicism. But as you head again toward low church Protestantism with people like John Calvin, the sacraments decline in importance or even get cast aside altogether in some Protestant sects. But there's also this weird bit with the 5 senses, Everyman to a certain extent, and knowledge, or 5 wits, and knowledge primarily, where they're basically like, priests are fucking awesome. There's this bit that's about 60 lines long, where they're basically just like, priests are amazing because they can save your soul from going to hell, and they can perform the sacraments, they can do baptisms, confirmation, marriages, they can transubstantiate bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. Nobody is better than priests. And then there's this bit where, and this is where it gets really interesting, because that's a sort of pro-Catholic thing, but the fact that they needed to put that in, the fact that they felt the need to have this digression where knowledge and the 5 wits are like fucking praising priests left, right, and center shows that there is a challenge to the priesthood. But then we also get this bit where knowledge says, if priests be good, it is so surely. But when Jesus hanged on the cross with great smart, there he gave out his blessed heart, the same sacrament in great torment, he sold them not to us, that Lord omnipotent. Therefore St. Peter the apostle doth say, that Jesus' curse hath all they, which God their Saviour do buy or sell, or they for any money do take or tell. Sinful priests giveth the sinners example bad, their children sitteth by other men's fires, I have heard, and some haunteth women's company with unclean life as lusts of lechery. There be with sin made blind, or these be with sin made blind, sorry. And Five Wits says, I trust to God no such may we find, therefore let us priesthood honor and follow their doctrine for our soul's succor. We be their sheep and they shepherds be, by whom we be kept in surety. So there is this sort of acknowledgement of the stuff that Martin Luther is critiquing about the church, that there's the buying and selling of indulgences, that sacraments, that sacred objects, relics, and things like this are bought and sold, that priests were having sex with women outside of marriage. Priests weren't allowed to get married, so obviously any women they were having sex with were outside of marriage, but often this was adultery. They were coercing married women into having sex with them. They were living these sort of luxurious lifestyles, often with the church as an institution, but also individual churches, monasteries, abbeys, cloisters, things like this, accruing great wealth and hoarding that great wealth. And this was part of the thing that sparked off the Protestant Reformation, was people saying, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This is not the way that things are supposed to be. You've taken vows of poverty, of celibacy, or vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You're not fulfilling them. You're not doing the things that God and Jesus want you to do. And so clearly, Everyman is sort of aware of the element, the play is aware of these sort of bubbling elements that will lead really into the Protestant Reformation, and trying to counter them in this. It's what Louis Althusser would call an ideological state apparatus, essentially, because the church is a state in a sense. And so this is a piece of media meant to promote the authority of the church.